I will understand bases and exponents. I will be able to evaluate exponent expressions and write them in expanded form. So it is my hope that through this video and through these examples, you will feel more confident with exponents, understanding what they are, as well as hopefully learn a little something new with what you do when you have a negative base number. So I want to start by reviewing some vocabulary. If you look at this first example, you see that I have a base of 5 and an exponent of 2. So the base number is the larger number and the exponent is the small number. And the exponent tells us exactly how many times I'm going to multiply my base number times itself. So in this case, since our base number is 5 and our exponent is 2, the expanded form would be 5 times 5, and then the simplified product, or the evaluated version, would be to go ahead and solve it, and 5 times 5 is 25. On the next example, I have 3 to the 4th power, which in expanded form would be 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So my base is 3, my exponent is 4, and it's 3 to the 4th power, which means I'm going to start with just the first two, 3 times 3, which is 9. And then I'm going to multiply 9 times 3, which is 27. And then lastly, 27 times 3, which gives me a product of 81. 8 to the 3rd power, which could also be read as 8 cubed. Whenever I have an exponent of 3, I can read it as cubed. Also, when I have an exponent of 2, as I did in the first example, I can read that as 5 to the 2nd power, or 5 squared. So 8 to the 3rd power in expanded form would be 8 times 8 times 8. So I'm going to start by doing 8 times 8 first, which is 64, and then lastly 64 times 8, which is 512. Now we're going to look at some examples that have fractions, decimals, or negative numbers as your base numbers. The same rules apply when you have a fraction as your base, except now, instead of multiplying an integer by itself a certain number of times, I'm multiplying a fraction by itself. So 1/5 to the 3rd power means that I'm going to multiply that fraction 1/5 by 1/5 by 1/5. So that's the expanded form. And the simplified product means I need to go ahead and multiply. So I'm going to multiply my numerators. 1 times 1, which is 1, times 1 again. The numerator is 1. Now I'm going to multiply my denominators 2 at a time. 5 times 5 is 25. And then 25 times 5 is 125. So the simplified product would be 1/125th. Same rules apply when you have a decimal. So this time I'm going to do 3/10 times 3/10 times 3/10 times 3/10. I guess I could write it as a fraction, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as a decimal. So 3/10 times 3/10, that's 9/100. Now I'm going to multiply that by 3/10 again. That's 27 thousandths, and then times 3/10 again. I have 81 10,000ths, or 0.0081. And yes, you may use a calculator when you're solving these. Okay, on the next one, you'll notice that I actually have a negative base number. And since the negative symbol is inside the parentheses, that means I'm going to multiply this -1 times itself 3 times. So -1 times -1 is a +1, and then a +1 times a -1 gives me a product that is a -1. So I just want you to notice that because I have a negative base number, in this case it's a -1, and I'm raising it to a power of 3, or the 3rd power, which is an odd number, I'm going to end up with a negative product. Okay, that would be the case for any base number that's negative. Remember, the negative has to be with the number inside the parentheses, and you have to raise the exponent, or the exponent has to be an odd number in order for you to end up with a negative product. Now this next one is a -2 is my base number. And yes, the negative is with the 2 because it's inside the parentheses. But now I'm raising it to the 4th power, which happens to be an even number. So I know right away that when I multiply, I'm going to end up with a positive product, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And then a positive times a negative is a negative, and then a negative times a negative is a positive. So because I have this even exponent, my product will be even. So now let's multiply two numbers at a time here. -2 times -2 is +4. +4 times -2 is -8. And -8 times -2 is +16. All right, now we have a negative fraction, and I have an odd number exponent. So I'm going to multiply -2/3 times, or excuse me, -2/3 times -2/3 times -2/3. I already know that my product is going to be a negative number because I have an odd exponent, which means the negative symbol is not going to cancel out. So now I'm going to multiply the numerators, and then I'm going to multiply the denominators, and I know again my product will be negative. So 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. So my numerator is going to be 8. My denominator would be 3 times 3, which is 9, and 9 times 3, which is 27. So my simplified product would be -8/27. On this next one, I am once again multiplying my base number of -2/3, but I'm squaring it, or my exponent is a 2, which is even. So my simplified product will be a positive number. 2 times 2 is 4, and 3 times 3 is 9. So my simplified product is 4/9. Okay, the next one is just 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. 4 is my base number. 4 is also my exponent. 4 times 4 is 16. And then 16 times 4 is 64. And then lastly, 64 times 4 is 256. Okay, last example, -2 to the 3rd power. The negative goes with the 2. So I'm multiplying -2 times itself 3 times. I already know my answer is going to be negative because I have an odd exponent of 3. -2 times -2 is +4, and +4 times -2 is -8. So my simplified product would be -8. So remember, this column in the middle is what you call expanded form, or and then the last column is where we have evaluated it or solved it to get a simplified product.